time is one of the great equalizers of all of humanity. Regardless of age or race or gender or socioeconomic status or class or wealth, all of us are given the same amount of time. In a day, in a week, in a month, in a year, everyone has the same amount of time. You can't buy it, you can't borrow it, you can't save it. In a day, every single one of us has the very same amount of time. Walk Through the Bible a few months ago surveyed a number of pastors, and one of the questions that we asked pastors was this: as you think about the churches that you lead, what is the reason why you think people struggle to read the Bible in your church? And the number one answer to that question, 48% of pastors said they believe that busyness or not having enough time was the number one reason why people in their churches struggled to read the Bible consistently. Time. Not surprisingly, the Bible has some really important things to say to us about time, about our view of and our use of time. One of those places is in Paul's letter to the church at Ephesus in Ephesians chapter 5. In the broader context of chapter 5, Paul has been giving the Ephesian believers lots of moral instructions about how they are to live their lives, the kind of lives that they are to live in light of what Christ has done for them on the cross. And he gets to the middle of chapter 5, and in verse 15, he says this: "Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise." Verse 16, how do you live wise? Here's how: making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil. Make the most of the opportunity. Make the most of the time. Use the time wisely, he says. The language that Paul uses in verse 16 to make the most of every opportunity is the imagery of acquiring and gathering and protecting the opportunities or the time that God has given you. That's how one lives wisely. And that got me thinking in the middle of a chapter around commands around how we are to live and the moral upright choices that we are to make. There's this very specific instruction that the way in which we live wise lives is to use our time, the opportunities that God has given us wisely, making the most of opportunity. And I just began thinking, why don't we view our time or the use of our time in the same way that we think about moral choices? Why don't we think about the use of our time the same way that we think about the use of our money or our resources? Protecting our time the same way that we think about protecting our purity or our words or our actions? Why do we seem to give ourselves a pass on how we spend our time? What if we lived as though we are accountable to God for how we spend our time? I mean, just in the same way that our moral choices or our behaviors or our words or our money, what if we thought about our time in the same way that we think about those things, and we had a heightened sense of accountability to God for how we manage and how we use our time? Are you struggling to read your Bible because you feel that the schedule is too full and there just isn't time to do it. Time isn't the issue. The issue is our choices of what we do with our time. The issue is whether or not we are living out God's instruction in Ephesians chapter 5. The question is whether or not we are wise in how we live. But we are to be careful in how we live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil.